My name is Bob Morgan, and I live in Sydney. I was born in Windsor, Ontario, in October of 1938. Yeah, I grew up in Windsor. Yeah, got my undergraduate degree in history, honors history and English at University of Windsor, and then I went to Queen's and I got my master's. And then I came out here to the junior college, and I taught history and political science for 4 years. And then I went back to Ottawa. I worked in the archives for a couple of years and learned how to be an archivist. And then I went to the University of Ottawa and worked on my doctorate. While I was working on my doctorate, it took a year, and I went to teach in Loyola University in Montreal, Loyola College, which was then part of Sir George Williams, now part of Concordia, and taught history there for just a year, and then opportunity came up to become the senior historian at Louisbourg. So I couldn't wait to get back to Cape Breton. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought I was going to be stranded in Upper Canada for the rest of my life. And then in '76, I went back to by this time it was no longer junior college. It had been a junior college when I was back here in the early '60s. But by the time I got back, it was a UCCB. Yeah, so a semi-university, university college, and I went to the Beaton Institute because Sister Margaret Beaton had died in '75, June, and I went back in September of '76. So I stayed the next year at Louisbourg. So I was there 5 years. Went back, head of the Beaton Institute, taught history, and I did that for the rest of my life. The last 10 years, I was also director of research the first director of research at CBU. When I worked on my doctorate, my focus was Cape Breton history. I focused on the colonial period, 1784 to 1820, when we were a separate colony. Nothing had ever been done on that before in any depth whatsoever. So, and I found the records at the archives in Ottawa when I was working there, and I got pretty excited about it. And while I was working there, of course, but before I left here, the first years before I went to work at the archives, when I was at the junior college, I became a good friend of Sister Margaret Beaton's. Of course, she was just starting what they call Cape Bretoniana, that no one could pronounce. They always wanted to say Cape Bretonia, or they didn't know what that was. But being in Canadian history, I was the Canadian history person. I started helping her collect stuff. I'd go out on the road. I thought this was great. And that got me interested in archival work. So that's why I went to the archives. Not because I had any intention of taking over here or anything like that. Just I thought I'd work at the archives in Ottawa for the rest of my life. I said, it's a nice career. I had my master's. You know, you get a nice job in the government. And I did. And I could have stayed there, but the Cape Breton bug bit me. That's the problem. If I'd been in St. John or Halifax, maybe I would have stayed down there, but I just fell in love with Cape Breton. I had to get back. So when the first opportunity arrived, when I was in Montreal that year teaching, I came back. I don't regret it for 1 second. Oh, I started back in '76, September. That's when I started back, and I started at the Beaton. We were on George Street, where the old R.J. Logue automobile showroom. That's where we were at the time. That's now the farmers, not the farmers market, but where the farmers market used to be on the corner of Pitt and George. That was the big building there. We moved to the AVTC, the Marconi campuses. It was called the Adult Vocational Training Center, AVTC. So we moved out there for a year because the new college was under construction on Grand Lake Road. So we were there a year in the old paint shop. The Beaton was, and it certainly wasn't designed for an archives, but I had a wonderful staff. And then the next year we moved into the new Beaton. It was where the library is now at CBU, opposite across the hall, not where it is at present, because that's another move. But anyway, and then of course while I was at the Beaton, I was still involved in the Old Sydney Society. Oh, it's a nice story. When I would be going to work at the old junior college, Babs and my wife would drive me down in the morning, and I'd going by the Esplanade, and I'd say, what's that old church? And no one, of course, she didn't know. She was from Inverness. So I worked it out and discovered this had been you know, the oldest, I didn't know it was the oldest standing Catholic church on the island. And I had no idea. I just saw this old church and it's abandoned. So got the idea that something should be done about it. I went to the parish at Sacred Heart, to the glebe, asked the Father Gallivan, Monsignor Gallivan there, if I could have the key to go in. Well, I went in and I got Don Arsenault and Don got interested too at the same time. We were already good friends. He taught chemistry, but he's a universal man. So anyway, we went in and we saw this building, and it was just, well, it had to be saved. Until we went to Father Monsignor Gallivan and spoke to him, and he said, well, look, they're thinking of demolishing it because it's dangerous. Might fall down and the church should be sued. So the upshot of it was, got Sister Beaton and Catherine McLennan, Hilda Day, who worked with Sister for many, many years, a great woman, Don Arsenault, and I formed we decided to form the Old Sydney Society. We knew nothing about nothing. There was no other active historical society on the island. We didn't know where money came from. We didn't know anything about that, you know. All we knew is that there were all these, with a bit of investigation, there were all these museums on the mainland supported by Halifax, and there was nothing here. Well, we had Louisbourg and Alexander Graham Bell, but those are federal, big institutions, but nothing of local. So we got a local lawyer to Rolly McIntyre, to get us incorporated. We didn't know what to do. We did that, got it passed, and found it, and we have the books from our first meetings. They're all there from the very first meeting. We have a picture of the first of us sitting, interestingly enough, in the Lyceum, which was junior college then. You know, like sitting there, and little did we know that one day that was going to be our headquarters. But sitting down there in the basement, which was, I think, a cafeteria, God knows what it was, I forget. But it was in the summer, there were no students around, and we got our picture taken. And that's how we started. And then, of course, in 1967, the centennial year, money became available. Suddenly Canada notices heritage. So there was grants then, and we got a few grants. And then there were RIP grants, LIP grants, LIT grants, you know, all those names. There were all the Little Red Schoolhouse grant. I think that's how we got our roof redone. We must have raised over 100,000 in those I'm not talking about now, we've certainly raised more now, but I'm saying in those early days, we raised 100,000. And then the next step was, to make a long story short, you got the museum going, and then we got Cosset House across the way. Cosset House was, you know, the oldest house in Sydney. We knew that. So we got Cosset House, thanks to Vince McLean, who was in the government at the time, because the Nova Scotia Museum didn't want to fund that. There were 21 fully funded museums on the mainland, not one here in Cape Breton. And yet they wouldn't fund it, so we pulled political, the old Cape Breton thing. And after some very interesting shenanigans, we got that, and we got Cosset House done. And then the next thing was Joe's House, and that was Joan Harris, who became interested in the society. A wonderful, you know, there's no need for me to tell you that she was a spectacular woman. So what happens is it has its own board, Joe's House. We're on that board, of course, but it's under the sort of the auspices of the Old Sydney Society. And now the next thing was the Lyceum, and which is another story, because the Lyceum is Lyceum Heritage Society. It's not the Old Sydney Society. It's run by a separate group. I'm in that other group, and the Old Sydney Society is renting that floor. But the Lyceum Heritage Society, Father Ora McManus, and I have been very active in that. We've raised $1 million. Our first drive was $500,000. We got $500,000. Had to do all the bricks, because the junior college had been in there, as you know, and it had to be redone. And so we did a lot of work on all floors. But the Old Sydney Society is in the basement, and as you know, we just had another remodeling, and Vince McLean was our president, interestingly. Don Arsenault had been the president before that. So we're still going. Don's at his 80s now, and we're still going strong. We weren't happy with the connection with the mainland, with the Nova Scotia Museum. And the Iona Connection was partly a result of us Cape Bretoners, because over the years, other historical societies shot off. They would come and see us, come to Beaton, or see old Sydney, see how we were doing it, and we would give them advice. And of course, then it just became what it is now. I think there are 40 of us, either historical societies and or museums on the island. We certainly, the old Sydney Society certainly had an influence on this to show you can do it. And grants were getting more available. So now, of course, the heritage movement in Cape Breton is wonderful. We didn't have an executive. We fought that. Even when we got an executive, there were people that were opposed. We didn't want it to be bureaucratic. It was a place to exchange ideas, to help each other. And as from the Beaton, I'd go down and I'd say, look, if you need some boxes, you know, if you've got documents, we'll give you boxes, we'll give you file cards, we'll give you, you know, stuff like that, because they couldn't afford, I mean, who could afford anything? Can't afford anything. And those, you know, especially so we helped with that. I mean, and everybody pitched in that way. It was really nice. It just gave us a chance to meet and talk to each other instead of Dominion being there and Inverness being there and none of us talking to each other. And we found out our own problems. And then when they had meetings, before the Iona Connection, all the meetings would be down in Halifax, of course. And you'd all have to troop down to Halifax. Well, that money would come out of your own pocket because the societies had no money to do that. We had to pay for that ourselves. Even the old city side didn't have the money. So now they'd sometimes help us, the Halifax people, with some money, but you generally had to make up for it yourself. So which was fine, but we found you'd only meet once a year. And to exchange ideas, we said, oh, it'd be much easier if we have one here in Cape Breton. Then the other, of course, at first there was suspicion. The Nova Scotia Museum looked down, looked and said, maybe they even told us, "Are you Cape Breton breaking away again? You know, going back to our old colonial independence." No, we're not. No, we're not trying to do that. It's just that we want to meet together, and then we could speak as a unified voice. We always had instant fixes in Sydney. We thought we were. You know, that if you just put in a heavy water plant, give us 100 million, and we will. Those aren't the answers. You've got to. It's got to start. That's my belief. And that's one reason why I'm so strong on heritage. You've got to go down to the roots, and you've just got to work at it, and work at it, work at it, work at it. You might die along the way, like Sister did, but you just, and Catherine and Joan, but you just, and I will go, but you just work. And there'll be new people come, and you build on that. And that's my philosophy. To give a community a deeper understanding of what it is. I think that's what it's like history, like a history book. If you're just living on the surface, which I think a lot of people in Sydney were when we started, it was all the present, you know, steel and coal, remember that. But they didn't realize that we have a deeper being, if I could say that in this, so that when steel went from Sydney, it didn't kill us. It didn't wipe out our personality, because we had a whole long history before. Just add steel to it, and now we're going beyond that. You know what I'm saying? And so it gives depth to the community, and it's nice. I mean, you know, you say it educates children, and that's lovely. But I believe that, and that's good for kids to know what their history is, because then they'll respect their community. You won't give them vandalism. But for adults, for us, to understand our community and the depth of our community, and respect our community as a result. And if you do that, your community will be a better place to live. I think you'll have pride in your community. Look what we've gone through in this community since 1785. Oh, well, it gives me a sense of completion. I mean, you know, you're a little boy, you're 23, starting college, and you get this idea to get you know, this thing going, and then here you are, you're 71, and you know, it's, you know, I never had a family, and we never had children, so this is my, you know, that's what I'm leaving. Bob Morgan. Is that all I got to say?